Meaning is all about why. If the meaning of your life is the why of your life. But a lot of people are wired, they become addicted to success, win, 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 win. And they're highly workaholic is what it comes down to. Now, to find calling, you have to resist that. But one of the worst mistakes, and makes calling also impossible, is this idea of work-life balance. When you zoom out in awe of something greater than yourself, that's when meaning finds you.
This is Open to Debate. I'm your guest moderator and Open to Debate CEO, Lia Matthow. Hi, everyone. As listeners know, we mainly stage debates here, but once in a while, we like to go in another direction that's adjacent to our core mission of curiosity. We bend the conversation frame just a bit to feature works of intellectual rigor that provide us with a different model for thinking twice and thinking critically about core assumptions impacting our lives. That's why we're delighted to have with us today Arthur C. Brooks to explore the themes of a book relevant to all of us, The Meaning of Your Life, Finding Purpose in an Age of Emptiness. Arthur has lived many professional lives. He once played the French horn at the City Orchestra of Barcelona. He returned to school in the U.S., became a scholar, and then spent a decade as the 11th president of the American Enterprise Institute. Since 2019, he has taught at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Harvard Business School, and is a leading researcher on human happiness. He's a best-selling author who has written 15 books. He's a columnist for the Free Press, where he writes the Pursuit of Happiness column, a CBS News contributor, and the host of the podcast Office Hours with Arthur Brooks. And he's taking time to be here with us today. Arthur, I'm delighted to welcome you to Open to Debate.
Thank you, Leah. What a delight to be with you, too.
What we hope to do here as part of our Think Twice series is tease out lessons and moments that led you to consider or reconsider precepts that may or may not lead us to a life of meaning. You and I will have a conversation, and then we will invite an amazing group of guests, reporters, authors, and others who have a specific expertise in this area and will continue to move the conversation forward. I was moved by your book in so many ways. I'm excited about the conversation, and I don't think an hour is going to be enough.
Yeah. Meaning is a big topic, isn't it?
It's a big topic. So you started your research for this book in kind of a tough place. You started by defining a problem. You looked at the modern crisis of unhappiness and looked at some troubling statistics. As you returned to academia in 2019, you said, half of the students were receiving mental health treatment. And what's more, you found students fearful of ideas, which they found objectionable. And that is something very disconcerting for us at Open to Debate. You spoke with strivers whose lives looked, as you call, like a simulation, good on paper, but they reported feeling empty. And you described this as a psychogenic epidemic. How did all of these initial findings drive your search for the micronutrients we need for a happy life?
Well, I was in academia for a long time, and I left in 2008, the end of 2008, to become the president of a think tank in Washington, D.C., one that you're really familiar with, the American Enterprise Institute, right? Because you worked with our people a lot, and that was a great time. I did that for 11 years, but I was completely worn out. I was just spent by the end of that, and living in Washington, D.C., in the middle of policy debates, and so I was 55 when I left that in 2019, and too young to retire, too late to go back and retrain as a circus juggler, a firefighter. I don't know. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with my life. So I did what people have done for thousands of years, which is when you don't know the answer to a question about your own life, go for a long walk. I mean, this is in almost every religion and philosophical tradition, is the idea of a pilgrimage. So I walked across northern Spain, the Camino de Santiago, which is more than 1,000-year-old pilgrimage. And by the end of it, I had a really good idea what I wanted to do. I wanted to go back to my roots as a behavioral scientist. I had gotten my PhD decades earlier, and I had been an academic, and I wanted to go back to do that. But I wanted to do it for a very specific reason, which I kind of learned on my pilgrimage, a very spiritual set of insights, as a matter of fact. I realized that my mission was to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas to add to this incredible body of work that was out there in behavioral science. A lot of it, by the way, was somebody we're going to hear from later, Sonia Lyubomirsky, who's been a huge, just model for me in the excellence in research. I wanted to do that. I wanted to do more of that. And when I got back to academia to do that, I took a professorship at Harvard to do that. I had no idea what I was about to find. I thought I was going to find what I had left, which was a happier world. I mean, college, that's when you make friends and you fall in love and you're exposed to crazy, even dangerous, but thrilling ideas. And what I got back to was this, it's like a plague had gone through my village. Academia was less happy than ordinary life. People were more likely to be depressed and anxious and lonely and addicted, and cancel culture was all around us, and it was sadness and anger. So I thought, okay, all right, now I know I'm back here. I'm back here to figure this out. And I started talking to people. I started talking to my students, and they kept saying the same things. I'm doing everything right, but I don't know what I'm meant to do with my life. My life feels empty. A lot of them said, I feel like I'm living a fake life. I mean, I wake up and I, check my phone and I read the news and I go to work on Zoom, especially after COVID. I date by swiping right. I do a lot of video gaming. My life feels like a simulation. And I'm like, okay, all right, what is this? It turns out that one of the very best predictors of this explosion of depression and anxiety, and by the way, depression is up by a factor of 3 for people under 30. It's up by a factor of 2 for people under 30 since about 2008. One of the best predictors is saying my life feels meaningless. I said, okay, this is what I have to take on. And so for the past 5 years, I've been studying what is the meaning of meaning, how have our brains changed that make it harder to find, and why. And most importantly, which is 2/3 of the work in this new book, is how do we have to live differently to solve the problem in each of our lives?
So you talk about this in a few ways, and you say enjoyment and satisfaction and meaning are critical.
Right. For happiness. Those are the parts of happiness, right?
Just for happiness and healthiness. And you say we're still doing okay on enjoyment, still maybe doing okay on satisfaction, but we just collapse around meaning.
Right.
And then you talk about meaning being comprised of coherence, purpose, and significance. And we can talk about that in many different terms. But tell us just sort of practically what that framework leads us to.
Yeah, so that comes from the work of a couple of really great social psychologists named Mike Steger and Frank Martella, who have done pioneering work on the idea of happiness. And what they find is that there's kind of 3 why questions that going into having a sense of the meaning of your life. And by the way, meaning is all about why. If the meaning of your life is the why of your life is what it comes down to. So it makes sense that these are why questions. The first why question is, why do things happen the way they do? That's coherence. Some people answer that with religion. Some people answer that with science. I try to answer it with both religion and science personally. Some people who are skeptical of religion and science, they answer it with, conspiracy theories, which is very interesting today because there's been an explosion, a proliferation of conspiracy theories around populations that don't tend to be religious or trusting of science. So that's a call for coherence, this idea that why do things happen the way they do? The second is purpose. So people use purpose and meaning synonymously. That's not right. Purpose is a subcomponent of meaning, and purpose is the why question. It's like, why am I doing what I'm doing in my life? Why am I getting out of bed in the morning? Why am I doing this? And it's so interesting because purpose is about goals and direction. And Sonia Lubomirsky has had these experiments over the years where she'll do something like with undergraduate students of just giving them basic goals and their life gets better and they get happier because it gives them a sense of purpose. And when you think about it, we're made for goals and purpose. We're made for progress. Probably the most important one is the last one, however, which is this why question. Why does my life matter? That's the significance question. That's kind of the It's a Wonderful Life question. That Frank Capra movie with Jimmy Stewart where, he's about to end his life and an angel comes and shows him how much worse life would have been for everybody around him if he wasn't there. And he realizes how significant his life actually is. And that's really the love question. Many people find their significance with religion. All of us find it when we have our children, for example. But if you don't have a sense of significance, then there's no why of life is what it comes down to. And so that's where I start with my students when they're suffering like this, is I see whether or not they have a coherence problem, a purpose problem, or a significance problem, or all 3.
And then you draw on the work of British neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist. We had this idea about hemispheric lateralization for many years that you're good at art or you're good at math. But what we really see now is the right side is about complex questions. It's the master, where
Right.
numinous activity occurs, and the left side is about managing complexity. How do they work together as partners in the search for meaning? And how do various aptitudes and presence in search come to play?
Yeah.
I
So
took your test.
you did. You did. Tell me
I
your
took
tell
the
me your
test.
results.
I am a relentless seeker.
Like me.
So I
Like
have
me.
my
Like
own
me.
problems.
So
Yes.
for our listeners, what that means, there's a test in this book that will place you on kind of a map of meaning. And it's based on the research of the researchers I mentioned before, Seeger and Martella. And what it is to see whether or not you have a presence of meaning, which kind of measures how much meaning you have or sense. And the other is how much you're looking for it. And so you, Lia, you said you're a relentless seeker, which means that you have a high sense of presence, but you keep looking all the time. And by the way, that's not the position to be in for happiness, because once you got it, you gotta
No, I
kind
see
of
a lot of
stop.
trapdoors there.
I know, and probably, your spouse will complain. It's like, stop, it's like, you found it, so stop, for Pete's sake. That's what it comes down to. But your question is really important. So my background is more in operations research and mathematical modeling. And before I actually became, interested in social science. And one of the things that we know from the world of operations research is there's two kinds of problems in life. There's complicated problems, which are super hard to solve, but with enough brain power and computing power and time, you can solve them and they stay solved. They're static problems, like how to create a jet engine or a toaster, for that matter. Complex problems, and I'm not logic chopping, they're different. They're different than complicated problems. Complex problems are super easy to understand, but actually impossible to solve. So, your cat is a complex problem. Easy to understand, impossible to solve. You'll never predict what your cat is going to do. A football
Is my
game.
dog easier?
Your dog is a little easier to predict, right? Which is why people like dogs better mostly. But but my marriage is a very complex problem, which is to say I understand what I want. I want love and affection, but it's impossible to solve because, it's too complex, adaptive, changing, dynamic human beings, which is why I love my marriage. Precisely. And all of the biggest problems in life of mystery and meaning and love and happiness, they're complex. And we care about these things the most, but all of the tech out there, all the technology and analysis and efficiency and hustle and grind are all complicated solutions that we're coming up with. And here's the point. Every time we have a complex problem of love and happiness and mystery and meaning, and we try to solve it with a complicated solution, we get it wrong and we make things worse. A classic case of this is that when Facebook was, the first meaningful social media platform was created, it promised to solve loneliness, which is an incredibly complex human problem. It was a complicated algorithm to solve a complex human problem, and it made loneliness worse. Not for everybody, but in general, if you spend more than an hour a day or so on social media, you get actually more lonely. And that's the biggest problem. Now, when it comes to the brain, this is the idea of Ian McGilchrist. I'm not a neuroscientist, but he's somebody who's been pioneering in this field. He's both a neuroscientist and a philosopher at Oxford, one of the most distinguished people in the world. He's brought back the idea, an old idea, that the two hemispheres of the brain, they govern different parts of life. It's not that they do entirely different things, but they have different priorities, you might say. And he says that the right side of the brain is the mystery and the meaning side. It's the why side. And why is everything. It's like, who cares what and how to if you don't know the why? The left side of the brain is the what and how to side. And so the why side is like, why do I, do what I do? Because I love my family. So what do? I go and support my family. And that's how my two hemispheres actually work together. The right side is the complex questions, the mystery and the meaning questions. The left side is the what and how to questions, the complicated questions, the stuff, the technology, the analysis. Our brains have been increasingly oriented because of modern life to only do the left-hand side stuff, according to McGilchrist, and according to this idea of complicated and complex. Every time we pick up our phones, 205 times a day on average, by the way, we're shoving ourselves into the left side of our brains, and we're not even addressing the why questions. Furthermore, we're using technology as if it could deal with the right-hand side questions. People are using ChatGPT for the girlfriend experience or, friendship or, God forbid, for therapy. And they're wondering why they're getting lonelier. I mean, you can simulate a lot, but you can't simulate meaning.
Now, this book does seem to build on a lot of your prior inquiry and interests, yet you say it's the hardest book you've ever written. What differentiates it?
Well, it's just such an open-ended question. Furthermore, it's one thing for me to say, okay, here's what meaning means: coherence, purpose, and significance. Here's the problem. We're on the wrong side of our brains, basically. Now the hard part comes is, what are we going to do? Because, this is a problem with social science. Social scientists are incredibly good at identifying problems and then not giving you solutions. And so most social science books are 90% problem identification and 10% pro forma solutions. That's not good enough when it comes to happiness. This book is 2/3 solutions, and I had to focus on that. That's what I was spending my time on, was looking at the parts of life that disproportionately open up the right hemisphere of our brains, that deal with the complex parts of life, things that used to be ordinary in life and that no longer are, that we actually have to adopt on purpose. So that's what most of the book is about, and that's why it was hard.
So transcendence is key, and it seems like when it comes to breaking free from self-focus, the American philosopher William James said we really need to differentiate between the I self and the M self. And there's an implication to look upward and outward. There are many ways to figure those out. Can you give us some practical tools about how we could do that? For some people, it will be religion. For some people, it will be something else. Some people, it will be service.
Right.
Give us some principles or some practical guidance to follow.
Yeah. One of the great ironies is that, we as an adaptive species, Homo sapiens, we have brains that are largely the same as they were 250,000 years ago in the late Pleistocene. And we are survivalists by paying attention to ourselves, by living in kind of a psychodrama. Me, my job, my car, my money, my book tour, which is on what I'm on right now. It's all about me. And the trouble with that is that makes you intensely unhappy. The reason is because when you focus on yourself, your own little things, you don't actually have a sense of the meaning of your life. When you zoom out in awe of something greater than yourself, that's when meaning finds you, for all of the neuroscientific reasons that we've talked about here, which is, and I'll give you an example of this. The most popular class at Harvard for undergraduates is astronomy. And it's weird because, they're not astronomers, like English majors or something, but they all love the astronomy class. So I asked a student, why are you all so supercharged by the astronomy class? And she says, the student I was asking, she says, I don't know. But, I go in on Thursday mornings at 9 to my astronomy class, and I'm all freaked out because I had a big argument with my mom, and I think I'm breaking up with my boyfriend, and I got a B in a class, which is like the end of the world at Harvard. And so, I come out of my astronomy class an hour and a half later, and I realize I'm a speck on a speck on a speck, and I understand the meaning of my life. And this is the thing. This is like one of the ways that it's not that you find meaning, it's that you put yourself in a space where meaning finds you when you transcend you. This is one of the great ironies of life. And it's a philosophical truism in almost every religion and secular non-religious philosophy, is that you need to transcend yourself. And there are two ways to do it. One is this kind of philosophical sophistication, looking upward, I call it. The other is looking outward and serving others, loving them, which in the Aristotelian sense is to will their good notwithstanding your feelings. And it's intensely pleasurable because you understand the meaning of your life when you love somebody, notwithstanding how you actually feel. It's an extraordinary experience. And this is what I talk about over the course. Look, this is a mystery. This is one of the great mysteries of life, but it works every time.
So just to be contrarian for a moment, there's an implication in the book that technology, looking at our cell phones 205 times a day, is fundamentally interfering with meaning. I mean, you can pretty much track some of these negative mental health statistics to the smartphone. But is there a think twice moment here? Is it possible that our tech devices can be gateways to transcendence? For instance, if you're not religious and you don't have a bedtime routine of prayer, could there be some benefit from listening to the Calm app or being roomy curious and being able to find these things that could also lead you to that place. I mean, the Stoics have never been more accessible to a mass
Right.
market. Is there some way to use this in a constructive way?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So one of the things I talk about in the book is I'm fundamentally a techno-optimist because there's so much good that we can actually bring to it. But I'm very sympathetic to people who like to drink alcohol moderately. And the reason I don't is because I can't, not because it's bad, is what it comes down to, right? I mean, this is an important thing to keep in mind that many things in life, if you manage them properly, they're wonderful. But if they manage you, be careful. And the classic case of this is technology, which we're largely being managed by our technology as opposed to managing it. But there are lots and lots of ways that we can use it appropriately. My kids, for example, are very moderate. And one of the reasons is that 2 of my 3 kids are U.S. Marines, which means they can't use social media. It's illegal for them to use social media in the way that a lot of young people do. Another one is very, very traditionally religious. And so the result is that they follow a fundamental rule of technology so that this is a think twice true moment of clarity, which is that if technology is a substitute for your in-person relationships, it's bad for your happiness. If it's a complement to your in-person relationships and your sense of transcendence, it's good for you. But that requires incredible discipline, presence of mind, and making it fundamentally not the center of your life. And that's one of the reasons that I have all of these protocols, very practical protocols in the book about how to do a detox of the digital devices, how to set up rules in your life, kind of like I would tell somebody to make sure that they don't drink too much.
I also found very helpful and very curious your framing of work-life balance, that looking at these separately is not a particularly good idea. Finding meaning in your work, up into the point of workaholicism, considering it a vocation, and then considering leisure time a pretty serious business.
Yeah.
Talk about how those two things, I think we're all in that struggle, and I think your insights on this would be very helpful.
Yeah, sure. One of the chapters is about finding meaning by finding your calling. And fundamentally, I'm talking about that in the vocational sense of work is what it comes down to. That's a really hard thing to do when you're a workaholic. And the reason is because work and non-work, they become, the work actually takes over everything. It invades every boundary and it ruins relationships. And I've done a lot of work in this, and I've taught a lot about workaholism. I teach at the Harvard Business School, for Pete's sake. These are workaholics in training, because they're going to take these unbelievable jobs, 100-hour-a-week jobs, et cetera, and how it's related to success addiction, how this is related to self-objectification. Almost all workaholics have the same fundamental childhood experience of only getting love and affection from their parents when they do something extraordinary.
The gold star syndrome.
Yeah, kind of. And so the result of it, and again, it's A's on the report card, first chair in the orchestra, pitcher in the baseball team, whatever. And they learn, their little synaptically plastic brains record the idea that love is earned, and that's wrong. Love is a free gift, freely given. Love is a grace. Anybody who makes you earn love doesn't love you. That's the bottom line. And that's what all horrible marriages have in common, is that each of them, the spouses have to earn each other's love. It's just like, it's a pathology is what it comes down to. But a lot of people are wired that particular way. And so they become addicted to success, win, 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 win. And they're highly workaholic is what it comes down to. Now, to find calling, you have to resist that. But one of the worst mistakes, and makes calling also impossible, is this idea of work-life balance. Why? Because work should be part of your life, and life, it includes work. It's a productive thing to do, whether you're paid or not, by the way. It's your productive endeavor. And so I talk about work-life integration, which is work, non-work integration. And that requires you take the non-work as seriously as the work. A lot of Americans in particular, because we love to work a lot, and many of my colleagues and I often have been guilty of workaholism. So non-work is just chilling so that we can recharge and work some more. And that's a huge mistake if you want to find your calling and you want to find meaning in your life. So I talk a lot about the work of Josef Pieper, the great 19th or 20th century German philosopher, who his most famous book is called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And he talks about taking leisure seriously. And all leisure means is a productive, generative activity for which they don't pay you. That's what it comes down to. There's no worldly reward. It's done for the inherent satisfaction of what you're doing. And it comes in kind of three categories. Religious or philosophical depth is actually becoming more adept. Relationships and learning. And so these are the three things. It's like becoming more, and for him, he was a Catholic, so it was more Catholicism. But again, all of this transcendence that I'm talking about is utterly applicable to non-religious philosophy and love relationships, and learning stuff is what it comes down to. In other words, leisure is serious business if you want to find the meaning of your life and find your calling.
You mentioned, on the hierarchy, your time at AEI, you probably would put into the category of service.
Yeah.
How did you personally know it was time to move into the calling zone?
Yeah.
Or were there a confluence of events that pushed you there?
Yeah, well, to be frank, I was unbelievably burnt out. And part of the reason is because I wasn't doing it right. It went really well on paper. I mean, it's a great organization. I love the organization. I love the people. I believed in the mission. I mean, all of the ingredients for calling were there. But I worked 80 hours a week for 11 years. I was on the road all the time. I missed a lot of my kids growing up. I was obsessed with the organization and the success of the organization. And so the result of it was that I couldn't find integration between my work and non-work. I mean, it's funny because, I think my kids, I don't remember any Little League games. I barely remember any birthdays. I barely remember my birthdays during those particular years. And so the result of it was that I recognized that, especially as somebody really deeply interested in the science of human happiness, that I was doing it wrong and I needed to start again. Now, as a little bit of background, one of the 4 psychological profiles of careers that I've written about an awful lot, and this work comes from the work in the 90s of a psychologist named Michael Driver at USC in California. And there's the linear careers where you go up and up and up and up and you're really ambitious and you're in the same line and you only change jobs when you can go to something better. There's transitory where you just change all the time because you don't really care about your job. There's the expert one where you don't live to work, you work to live. And so it's all about security and predictability. But the one that characterizes a lot of really creative people is the spiral career, which is a bunch of careers of your own design, like 7 to 12 year careers, and you take it down to the studs and you start again. And people are like, why are you changing careers again, man? And it's because it's in here. I have an idea of that. And that's really, really me for sure. I mean, I've taken my career down to the studs 4 times. And they're about a decade long, a little bit between 9 and 12 years each, just like Michael Driver predicted. It was amazing. I really felt seen by that research for the first time. So I knew it was time. And I also knew as a CEO that you get 10 years. I mean, you really get 10 years. It takes 5 years to set up your vision and then 5 years to instantiate your vision, but you don't get a second vision. So I asked a guy, one of these titans of private equity who had hired and fired 1,000 CEOs, and he was on my board at AEI. I said, how do you stop as a CEO? And he said, well, sonny boy, there's 2 options. You can leave before you're ready, or you can leave on somebody else's terms. And I said, I'll choose door A, Monty. and so I left, I guess, a little bit before I was ready. But in retrospect, I was absolutely ready. And I went on my Camino. I went on my pilgrimage where I walked across northern Spain and I prayed and I thought. And I came to what I'm doing today, and I couldn't be happier that I did.
So that brings me to another point. You are not a suffering eliminist. You believe very much that is part of the process. That's somewhat counterintuitive today. People want things to be easy, pleasant, fun. Talk about the role that plays in getting to this elevated level, whether it's career or love.
Yeah, so humans want things to be easy and pleasant fun. That's just stipulate to the fact that Homo sapiens are trying to avoid unpleasantness. We're trying to avoid negative emotion all day long. And negative emotions come in basically 4 boxes: fear, anger, disgust, and sadness. And the human limbic system is designed to actually experience these things because your limbic system is an alarm system for what's going on around you. It sets you up to be able to react appropriately and survive and pass on your genes and not get wiped out and survive another winter is what it comes down to. So all of it's really necessary, but we're averse to those things. The problem in modern life is that we teach a lot of young people that if they are suffering, if they are experiencing pain, that something's wrong and broken. Well, just based on what I just said about the human limbic system, if you're having negative emotions, it means your alarm system is working properly. If you're having negative experiences, it means that you're alive on planet Earth dealing with your fellow Homo sapiens, which beats the alternative. The truth is that, dukkha, which is the first noble truth of Buddhism, is that life is suffering for the reason that life is what it comes down to. And eliminating that, the idea that you would go to a campus counseling center and say, I'm studying at Harvard and I'm really sad and anxious. And they would say, well, that's a problem we got to take care of. Well, it's like, no, if you're studying at Harvard and you're not sad and anxious, you need therapy because it's a hard thing that you're doing. Now, it can be disproportionate. Don't get me wrong. I'm a very big fan of mental health treatment when it's necessary. But sadness and anxiety are not prima facie evidence that something's wrong. And that's a big wrong turn that we've taken in our mental health infrastructure in this country, is to tell young people that they got to fix it when they don't feel good, is what it comes down to. Furthermore, and this is based on everything in neuroscience is contested. So I say all of this with appropriate humility. There's work that Richard Davidson at University of Wisconsin and Madison has done about the side of the brain that you use, or that is disproportionately active when you're experiencing negative emotions. And it's the right hemisphere of the brain, which not coincidentally is what Ian McGilchrist says is the lie side, the meaning side, which is why I believe, and I think it's reasonable at least to speculate, because there's no proof of this. We haven't gone that far in the research, that when people have suffered a lot, they virtually always say that was the period of their life when they actually experienced the most meaning.
So everything in a certain way in transcendence comes back to love, whether it's giving up, giving out, receiving. You even talk about being able to receive love. How can the knowledge and research imparted in this book help the lonely people living? You talk about your beautiful marriage many times throughout the book. Help all the lonely people living in the smartphone, Zoom, dating app hellscape find real love.
Yeah.
What do they need to do to walk that path?
Yeah. So life is meaningful when it's in real life. Life IRL is what actually will bring meaning, and the simulacrum for life, the simulated life, it will leave you cold. Ultimately, it will leave you cold. Now, there's a role for technology in this. I've worked with dating apps to help them to be the ignition switch so people can meet each other. But the whole point is to get off the apps and into real life as soon as possible, and that's what it comes down to. Some of the case studies. One of the things that I do when I'm doing a book like this is that social scientists in the old days, what they would do is they would look at a bunch of numbers and then they would talk to a bunch of people. So when Adam Smith was writing The Wealth of Nations in 1776, he got a bunch of evidence and then he would walk the factory floor. And so I try to walk the factory floor. And this book has a lot of stories from young people and the experiences they would have. And there's one young guy at the beginning of the book named Mark. And he's 32 years old, and he's got everything going for him. The first person in the history of his family to go to college. He's super ripped. He's in shape. He's got a great job. He's making a bunch of money, and he's miserable. His life feels completely empty, and the reason is because his whole social life is virtual. That he's listening to podcasts instead of having real conversations. He dates on the apps. He doesn't see people most days because his job is entirely virtual. He lives in San Diego, but his company is someplace else. And so the result of this is that he doesn't have the IRL experience. And once again, you can simulate a lot in life, but you'll never pass the Turing test for meaning if you're trying to simulate meaning. And by the way, this is not a new idea. That was literally the plot of the movie The Matrix, which I'm going to shock all of our listeners right now. That was 27 years ago that movie came out. But that was fantastic science fiction in 1999. And the plot is no longer science fiction. It was an artificial intelligence, a machine intelligence that was subjugating humanity, that was taking energy away from human beings, which is sort of the idea was it would take kinetic energy away from people. But today we would say it's taking attention, which is energy. And it was keeping them in a pleasant simulation so it would continue to provide the energy. Lia, we're in the matrix. Mark is in the matrix, is what it's coming down to. And that's the important thing that we actually need to keep in mind, because that's the problem that everybody's facing today.
How does free will play into this? I mean, you mentioned sort of 5 different precepts that you intermingle. Is there a way to summarize that for us in an inherent way? Because it underlies all of this.
Yeah. So the free will is a real debate about consciousness that's as old as the hills. This is what philosophers have been talking about forever. And it's an important debate in the search for meaning for the following reason. Not because you have to come down on one side or the other. And the debate is basically this. Some people who are radical physicalists believe that our lives are largely deterministic, and that what appears to be free will to us is largely an illusion. Other people believe that we actually do make our decisions. I'm not going to sort that out. People have different views on that. Here's the important idea. You need to think about that. You need to break your head on that. Why? Because that's exactly the kind of philosophical conversation that will illuminate complexity in the right hemisphere of your brain. When you're thinking about questions like that, meaning finds you. That's the important thing. And it's interesting because, everybody my age remembers their college experiences when they were 20 and they were coming back from a party at Saturday night, 11:30, and they would sit around the dorms having these unbelievably painfully pretentious conversations with their friends that if they heard a recording today, they would be mortified. But that was literally wiring their brains the way their brains needed to be wired. And now, of course, they're not doing that because each one is on their separate device, which is stunting their psychological and probably even their neurophysiological development, which is one of the biggest problems with why college is so much more depressing and less meaningful than it was in the old days.
Have you seen any improvement from 2019 to 2025?
No, I've seen things get worse, but I think things are going to get better. And I'm really an optimist about this because people always figure it out. I mean, people, the doomsayers about AI, I don't believe it. And I don't believe it. And one of the reasons is because if you extrapolate with a straight line, you find terrible things always. You're going to run out of oil. We didn't run out of oil, right? You're going to, the population is going to go to 30 billion people and run out of food. We didn't do that because nothing's linear. And the reason nothing is linear is because we're geniuses. We're ingenious. We're ingenious at creating huge problems, by the way, like wiping out boredom and destroying meaning in the process. But we're also ingenious at solving the problems that are the biggest around us. And I think that we will. The problem is that between now and then, we could lose another couple of generations of young adults, and that's not okay, which is why I'm doing my work. I honestly believe that people are going to figure it out, that AI is ultimately going to be like a new industrial revolution, which at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution led to all kinds of urbanization and fragmentation and misery and trouble, and ultimately led to the middle class and the weekend and all that kind of cool stuff. And that's what we're actually going to get. But I want to see if I can avoid a lot of the pain along the way.
We're going to bring in some other voices now, members of the press, authors, and other experts who've been listening in and have questions of their own. First, I'd like to welcome Sonia Lyubomirsky. Sonia is a distinguished psychology professor at the University of California, Riverside, and a happiness researcher. She's also the best-selling author of 3 books, The How of Happiness, The Myths of Happiness, and the recently released How to Feel Loved, the 5 mindsets that get you more of what matters most, which she co-authored with Harry Reid. Sonia, please come in with your question.
It's a pleasure to be here. I find meaning in love. I want to say, Arthur, I love you. And my first question is, and I mean that, actually my first question is, I live in a city where people are obsessed with finding meaning, wellness, happiness. You can't go to a coffee shop or a party without tripping over people who are trying to find meaning in psychedelics and breath work and whatever. And I sometimes just want to punch them and say, why don't you go get a job or do something of service to others? Because this pursuing meaning, I think, can become a form of consumerism in itself, right? Yeah. And then people are just kind of navel-gazing. Can the pursuit of meaning actually backfire and get in its own way?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And as you know, of course, because I've known you since way before we met each other. And just for a little bit of background, Sonia and I have traveled to Dharamsala to see the Dalai Lama together. And her research has been fundamentally important for me for decades now. And okay, so what do you find in your research? You never tell people to go be happy. You go tell them to do something that will lead to happiness. And you don't even tell them. You don't say you're trying to be happier. You're saying you're trying to volunteer and be good to other people. You're trying to set goals in your life, whatever it comes down to. And that's the thing. See, these are ideas that you don't get directly. These are things that you get indirectly, which is why I talk about in my book, if you want to find meaning, stop thinking about meaning and go do things that my great-grandfather took for granted. Ask big questions. Go love somebody deeply. Look upward to God or to serve other people. Look for your calling in the things that you do by serving others. Once again, look for beauty in your life. Lean into your suffering, because I'm trying to do all the stuff that you've been doing in your experiments for the past 30 years, quite frankly. And if you look at meaning directly, you can't see it. Isn't that the funniest thing about these things?
My latest book is called How to Feel Loved. And so I've been thinking a lot about love. I feel like I'm in love school, and I find meaning through love. I think after 36 years of research, I've really landed on this cliche, which is the key to happiness is feeling loved. Yeah. And so I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on this, like, the relationship between love and meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because by the way, your book is phenomenal. I know because I blurbed it. I got a quote on the back of that book, and it's a wonderful book that everybody should read, because this is kind of the punchline of everything in life. We have this great study that you're really familiar with called the Harvard Study of Adult Development that's been going on out of Harvard for the past 85 years. And that started following sophomores at Harvard in 1938. Yeah, and the original sample was Ben Bradley from the Washington Post. JFK was in the original sample. And then they matched it up with guys who didn't go to college. And that sample was the Boston Strangler, believe it or not. He didn't make it to the end of the study. But then it was with their spouses and with their kids. And now it's really representative of the population. And it asks, what do people have in common early in life? What do they do? How do they live differently? Those who are happy and healthy in their 80s and 90s versus those who are not happy and not healthy. How do they live differently? It's the closest we can get to a crystal ball. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in that study that's just super obvious, like drinking, smoking, eating, exercise. Because if you're extremely unhealthy, and you're going to be miserable. But there's other stuff that's less so. So having a way to cope with your misery, and you got to get good at your way to cope with misery. Some people it's psychotherapy. For me, it's prayer. For some people, it's journaling. You got to get good at something because you need that skill. And the second is of these counterintuitive ideas is that learning is protective. But the most important thing, if you get nothing else from all these studies, this is what the guy who ran it for 35 years, George Valiant, said. The punchline of this 85-year study is that happiness is love, full stop. We are creatures who are built to love and be loved. And by the way, you have to be loved to love, and vice versa, because it's a circulatory system. You say this in your work. It's like blood. If you stop it, like say, I want all this love, but I'm not going to give love. Well, good luck to you. It's not going to work this way. It's what it comes down to. And so this is ultimately the goal that we have, which is why calling is about service, and beauty is about service, and suffering. Sonia, you suffer together. We suffer together is what it comes down to, because that's a form of love too. This is, at the end of the day, what we're built for.
Arthur, you invited me and a group of others to visit Dharamsala, India, to have a dialogue with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It was very impactful, and he said some really, really impactful things. What impacted me the most was when he said, "Love is not a feeling; love is a decision."
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this ever since, and I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. And as a little bit of color, by the way, for our audience, Sonia and I, we thought we were going to die in a plane crash on the way home from that. We lost an engine at 13,000 feet over the Himalayas and have an emergency landing.
An engine literally dropped out of the plane, and I was holding Arthur's hand the whole time. It turns out he's a great person to sit next to when you think you're going to die, because he was very confident. He's like, it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. Yeah. It was more dire than you thought, right?
Yeah. Who knows? Or less, but we're not pilots. We don't, anyway. So, but anyway. The Dalai Lama did say, look, love is a decision. Love isn't a feeling. And that's incredibly important. That's an Aristotelian concept, by the way. This is not just an Eastern idea. And it's best kind of put by the philosopher who brought Aristotle to more modern audiences, which was Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas to Catholics, but Thomas Aquinas, who was one of these medieval scholastics, along with Averroes and Maimonides. And what he said was that to love is to will the good of the other as other. I mean, but that's just like so hardcore. And, to will the good of the other is other. In the Bible, that's love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. It's not a question of your feelings. It's loving notwithstanding your feelings. And this is the important thing to keep in mind that Dalai Lama was saying. If you feel aggrieved and you feel sad and you feel angry, the answer is to go love in spite of your feelings. Strong people love when they don't feel it, is what it comes down to, which of course changes the world. Loving without the feeling is what changes the world.
His Holiness also said, I am your mother and you are my mother. Arthur, I am your mother, you are my mother. He said, how can we harm each other when we're each other's mothers?
I know. And by the way, our mothers don't always have tender feelings toward us. And we don't always have tender feelings toward our mothers, but we would never hurt our mother.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sonia.
I can't wait to read your books as well. Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Matthow Crossman. Matthow is an ordained pastor and senior lecturer of divinity and humanities and director of the Life Worth Living program at the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at the Yale Divinity School. He's also been an author or co-author of several books, including Life Worth Living, A Guide to What Matters Most. Matthow, please come in with your question.
Hi, Arthur. Thanks so much. It's great to be part of this conversation.
Thanks.
I'm wondering, what's the difference between having meaning and having a sense of meaning? I guess I mean to ask, can we be wrong about meaning, or is meaning the sort of thing that's sort of like self-authorized?
Is it self-creating, kind of like the Buddhists would say that people are self-creating, or that the soul is self-creating?
Well, yeah, mostly I'm wondering, can we be wrong, right? When Jesus talks about a rich man tearing down his barns to build bigger ones, he doesn't describe that rich man as deeply unhappy. It seems like a lot of the religious traditions, at least, hold open the possibility we could be really profoundly mistaken about a genuine presence of meaning in our lives.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of people it's funny because, people will ask me, I like you, I'm a committed Christian. It's literally the most important thing in my life. And people will say, well, obviously, as a happiness specialist, you must want that more than anything else for your kids. Is happiness. I say, wrong. That is not what I want. I want holiness for my kids. I want honesty for my kids. I want compassion from my kids. I want loyalty and faithfulness from my kids, more than I want happiness. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because all of the things that I talk about in my study of happiness, none of that has the metaphysical significance of saying what's right. And so people will ask me, for example, about transcendence. And Leah asked me about transcendence earlier. And to say, transcendence actually is very commonly achieved through religious faith. But transcendence can also be achieved through other things, through a walk in the forest, through studying the works of Johann Sebastian Bach, by, Vipassana meditation practice. None of that says what's metaphysically right. That is a different kettle of fish. That's a completely different conversation, as a matter of fact. And so I have really two goals in my own life. I want to have a sense of meaning, and I want the truth. I want the truth is what it comes down to. And so your question is not splitting hairs, man. Matthow, you are not logic chopping, despite the fact that we're both Ivy League guys, which is what we do for a living, is logic chopping. It's very, very important distinction. And I recommend to everybody that you seek the truth relentlessly and not just try to have a sense of contentment, because that's not good enough.
I also share I think it's a really generous, and I share your desire to be generous and hospitable to non-religious folks in the conversation about transcendence. So this question comes from a place of agreeing with you on this. But I'd love to know, just from your perspective, what does God offer that secular philosophy doesn't or can't?
So yeah.
So and I wonder whether it might be something like genuinely unconditional love. I'm actually really heartened by how much this conversation has talked about love. But anyway, I don't mean to propose an answer to you. I genuinely want to know what you think.
Well, certainly if I just gave you that answer, it would be more than sufficient, I dare say, because that is the basis of our shared faith, is unconditional love. I mean, and it couldn't. I mean, God is love, said St. John the Apostle. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. It's in black and white. In the Christian Bible, at least. And so that's a very important thing for us to keep in mind. But there's other things that make religion especially efficacious. Number one is it's an established physics of what we're talking about here. For a lot of people, it's a simpler path is what it comes down to. The idea of creating my own path, that's a hard thing to do. I mean, I've studied a lot of math in my life, and I didn't make up my own math. I'm just not smart enough. And, when I go back and I look at, St. Thomas Aquinas, who we just discussed a minute ago, he's so much smarter than me. And I mean, it's like, I'm not going to come up with 5, sources of evidence of the existence of God. I'm not good enough is what it comes down to. And so for me, it makes it possible for me to kind of cut ahead. I use calculus all the time in my work too. I didn't invent calculus. Leibniz and Newton invented calculus, smarter guys than Arthur Brooks. And I just use the tool is what it comes down to. So in a very, just instrumental way, it's an incredibly efficacious thing to do. And then of course, for me, it has the advantage of actually ringing true about what I want, which gets back to your first question, your beautiful first question, which is the sense of meaning versus the deep meaning, the deep truth that is behind cosmically, mystically, the truth that underlies all things. And for me, that has the ring of truth to it. And that's ultimately what I want the most.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to invite one more questioner, Julia Pogachevsky. Julia is a senior health reporter for Business Insider. Julia, thanks for joining us. Please come in with your question.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this conversation. It's been fascinating. And a theme that I noticed throughout is that modern life is reducing the friction that is needed to find purpose and meaning, whether it's social media, whether it's AI. And I guess my question is, if we keep optimizing for ease, let's say more people are dating AI bots or outsourcing thinking to AI, what do we stand to lose, not just individually, but as a society?
Well, the biggest problem, of course, with trying to create a simulacrum for these relationships is that we don't make them easier. We actually make them impossible. And life is like this. A lot of times what promises us greater ease actually bars the door to what we truly want. This happens all the time. And I mean, humans are incredibly good at solving small problems and creating huge crises as a result of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the minor annoyance of physical pain in the form of a headache or even more extreme pain. And I'm going to create opiate drugs that will kill 100,000 people through overdoses. I am going to create a social media platform that promises to eradicate loneliness and makes loneliness worse. This is the kind of thing that we're doing all the time. And so the result of it is that we need to remember that for a good deal of our lives, friction is what we want, because we actually get what we need by passing through suffering, even suffering that we elect. And this is an incredibly important subject that I talk about in my book, because I have the last chapter of the book, or the second to last chapter before the conclusion, is called Don't Waste Your Suffering. Don't waste your suffering. And, so, by the way, my students will say when I talk about suffering, are you saying, Professor, we got to go looking for it? I say, oh, don't worry, it will find you. The question is what you do when it does. Are you railing against it and trying to eliminate it? As we talked about Lia and I talked about in the main part of the conversation, are you optimizing tools so that you can avoid it as much as possible? Or are you living your life and saying, what am I supposed to learn from this friction? What am I supposed to learn from this? If there were a machine that would hook electrodes up to my body so I could get more efficient muscle protein synthesis while I sat there in front of the television, I would still go to the gym. I still would go to the gym because, I'm telling you, I mean, so Julia, I want to be alive. The Saint Irenaeus and, the end of the 2nd century, this ancient thinker in Christian theology, he said that the glory of God is a man fully alive. Forgive the gender exclusive language. He meant a person fully alive. And fully alive means all of it. Bring it on. Bring it on. And only when you say bring it on are you setting yourself in a position to not avoid the friction. Some, yes. Look, I'm going to take an Advil if I have a headache. Some of it, for sure, I'm not going to walk all the way from New York City to Washington, D.C. or take a horse. I'm going to avoid some of the friction, but I'm not going to say that my goal in life is to eliminate friction, because that's not to be fully alive.
You talked about work being, a big part of finding meaning and purpose. And as we know, there's a lot of anxiety about AI taking people's jobs. Do you see that disruption as potentially, creating a deepening the meaning crisis for people? Or do you see it as potentially an opportunity for people to, take on potentially more meaningful, more human work?
Yeah. So my answer to that is yes. And let me tell you what I mean. Typically what will happen when there's a tremendous technological disruption is that it creates a lot of opportunities for profit. Right, which is why people are undertaking it. This is just how markets work. And I'm not against markets per se. In terms of human development and human welfare, generally speaking, there's a period of adjustment that creates a lot of human costs. And then ultimately, we figure out how to use it in a way that makes our lives better, is what it comes down to. And this is what I anticipate with AI. I anticipate a lot of dislocation of jobs, which is what people are talking about. But more importantly, people using it incorrectly. AI is an adjunct to the left hemisphere of your brain. It's great at solving complicated problems. People are using it wrong, not just for that, but they're trying to solve complex problems. That's the girlfriend experience. I mean, we're creating, pornography AIs, for example, which is going to exacerbate the crisis of addicted pornography, especially in the lives of young men. We're going to see more and more people who use AI as a friend. God forbid, therapist. And you can't fool your brain. It will never pass the Turing test, because we're trying to solve problems that originate from the right hemisphere of our brain in the left hemisphere of our brain, which is going to make our problems worse. And that will lead to more depression and more anxiety and more loneliness and more addiction, etc. That's what I expect in the short term. In the long term, and by the way, in the interim, the people who get it right will use AI to solve a lot of complicated problems, which will eliminate a bunch of dumb things they don't want to do, and use that time with the people that they love. So get back to Sonia's point, so they can love more. Love takes time. Love is a very time-intensive activity. And so the result is we need actually to interact with other people and to solve that problem. And I believe ultimately at the end of the day, not everybody, but most people will be able to see AI as the source of a real renaissance in their lives. Ultimately, we could have more people doing crazy, complex, love-based things like having babies and falling in love and getting married and studying philosophy and doing all that stuff and actually working fewer hours and doing that. I ultimately think it's going to take decades to do, but that's where we're going to wind up. I'm crazy optimist, I know, but I think that's where we're going to get.
Thank you so much for that final question, Julia, and thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
So, Arthur, before I let you go, in researching, thinking deeply about this book, building on so much of your prior life experience, what did it make you think twice about? Is there any truth that you held dear that you're now reconsidering?
There were a lot of, just bad, meaning hygiene practices that I had in my life. And they just creep in. I'm a workaholically success addicted, self-objectifying adult child. I am. It's like another book and a book. And I would take a book about meaning and then bust my hump to try to make it into a bestseller. It's just the absurdity of that, Leah.
I love it. It's a perfect way to end.
The bottom line is this: you're never going to solve this problem, because complex problems don't have solutions. You live with complex problems. You recognize that they are an ongoing project in your life. And to get back to the point that you and I made a bunch of times and that we talked about with Sonia and all of our guests, is that happiness is love. Meaning comes from love. It just does. And anytime something is being crowded out, it means that love is being crowded out. It's because you're making a mistake. And to the extent that even with my book on meaning, I would crowd out my love relationship, shows that I'm a weak man. I'm frail. And I need to get back to the first principles that I talk about myself. And I'm dedicated to doing just that.
Well, it sounds like you're getting better at it.
Life's pretty sweet. I'm not going to lie, but there's room for improvement, and I can always backslide. So, wish me luck.
Well, I do, and I wish you luck on the rest of the tour, and I am so grateful that you took the time to join us today. Thank you. And again, the book is The Meaning of Life, Finding Purpose in the Age of Emptiness. I'd also like to thank our questioners for bringing their thoughts to the table and moving this conversation forward in unexpected ways, Sonia, Matthew, and Julia. And finally, a big thank you to you, the audience, for tuning in to this episode of Open to Debate.